to those who are joining us on this edition on YouTube. So let's hear who we've got on the podcast today.
I'm Fergus Ewing. I'm the MSP for Inverness and Nairn, a position that I've held for the last 22 years and a great honour. I also spent 2 decades working as a solicitor with my own legal practice, and I spent 13 years working as a government minister. So that's me.
And my name is Emma Harper. I am a South Scotland regional MSP. I came to Holyrood in 2016. And before that, I was a operating theatre nurse for about 30 years. So if you need me to take bullets or your liver out and put a new one in, I can do that.
I don't think we'll hopefully not have to take you up on that offer, but it's very kind. Can I welcome both Fergus and Emma to the podcast? Starting with you, Fergus, just I want to get a flavour of how you become involved in politics. How did you initially get into politics, and how did you become part of the independence movement?
Well, it was in the blood, it was in the family. My mother, Winnie Ewing, really set the independence cause alight in 1967 when she won Hamilton. So I was brought up to see my mother working as an MP, as an MEP, and then an MSP actually. So it was in the blood. But from an early age, I've believed that Scotland should run our own affairs. It seems odd that we don't accept that that's the norm for countries in the world. And I've always believed that Scotland has so many strengths with our people and our economy, our natural environment, our resources, that we have the right skill set and assets that we need to be a successful country in the 21st century. And I believe that as much now as I did when I first joined, which was about 5 decades ago.
And Emma, what was your journey?
So I lived in California for about 14 years and then returned home about 2004, 2005. And while I lived in California, I saw how people celebrated their independence on July the 4th, and it was normal. It was just part of being in a normal independent country, running your own affairs, manage your own systems. And so when I came back to Scotland, I was asked to come to a local meeting of the SNP, and I went along, and soon after that joined the party, got involved. And again, I totally agree with Fergus. I mean, I don't understand why people think it's mad to not think that any country our size can't run its own affairs and have its own financial autonomy. And so to me, that's part of why I'm involved in this, so that we can achieve independence.
Well, thanks for that. And obviously the weather's slightly different now from California, but it can be just as good on certain days of the year. Back in 2014, this episode is focusing on farming. You both represent farming communities in different places in Scotland, and you both have experience of the farming community. Back in 2014, Better Together stated that staying in the UK is best for Scotland's farming and rural communities. Many folk bought that at the time, but as time goes on, do you think those who seek to sell the union have a strong argument now? Where are we now in 2022? I'll start with you, Emma.
Well, yeah, so going through the whole, as a South Scotland MSP, we've got 3 constituencies that are Conservative MSPs and MPs. And so trying to engage and support people that Brexit is not the way we want to go, that we see how supply chains have been interrupted, our inshore fisheries had real struggles when the Brexit occurred. So, for me, I really think that what we have seen is the damage that has been inflicted on our farmers and supply chains. And that's something that you know, I think people are starting to pay attention to, whether they're our rural businesses or whether they're people that depend on our farmers for the food supply. So it's something that I'm really, you know, focused on making sure that people are aware of what the challenges are now as we are dealing with the difficulties that Brexit has caused for us now.
And we're in a unique time in terms of looking at those particular difficulties, because people can see that food and drink trade to the EU is down 47% in the first quarter of 2021 and overall 24% down on January. Worse is expected to come in 2022 with the implementation of border controls as well. So these are decisions that have been taken at Westminster in spite of the promises that were made in 2014 about looking after farming. Fergus, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, in the referendum on Scottish independence, the No campaign largely comprised a series of negative scare stories. And one of them was that if you voted for independence, you'd be wrenched out of the European Union. And by implication, if you voted no to stay in Britain as part of the United Kingdom, then your position in the EU was safe, secure, and forever. And you know that simply was untrue. And I think it does really reveal that most of the arguments against are really motivated by the desire to scare people out of what I would regard as their birthright to be an independent country alongside all the other countries in the world. But of course, now we are no longer in the European Union, and some of the problems we've seen have resulted from the disruption that the trade barriers in particular have caused for farmers, fishermen as well, and generally for free trade. I mean, obviously, people are working hard to try to resolve these, but I think the real worry for farmers and crofters is that the European Union is not perfect, it's a bit bureaucratic, but actually it did provide a reasonable continuity of income for farmers and crofters. It did support food production, perhaps not in the right way. I was delighted when I was the farming minister to force the UK government to pay back to Scotland the convergence monies that had been withheld from us for numerous years, which Europe mandated to Scotland. That 160 million plus an additional 50 million that we secured working with Jim Walker and others. So the European Union was...
People forget the long fight that you had to wage to get that money released for farmers, and it shouldn't have had to be a fight. It should have just been something that came to farmers by right.
Well, it was a long campaign. It was very few people thought actually that we would succeed, and we did, of course, repay all that money to farmers and crofters. Every penny went to farmers and crofters. It was their money, and it went to them. But getting back to the big issue of independence, you know, I think that in Scotland, we value farmers and crofters for three things: producing high quality food. And we should never take food security for granted, particularly in this uncertain world in which we live. Secondly, they have always been the custodians of the environment, even before the phrase environmentalism became part of the common usage. They've always been the people who actually do the work in maintaining the dikes and the fences, the fields, the patterns of crofting, the patterns of farming, of arable farming, of livestock farming, of fruit farming, of vegetable farming that we've seen. They're the ones that actually sculpt and shape the land and take a pride in it because they pass it on to the next generation in almost every case. And thirdly, they're at the heart of rural Scotland. And I think that now that we're out of Brexit, it's becoming more clear that the UK government wants to stop paying farmers for producing food. They think it's not necessary. They seem happy to import things from New Zealand or Brazil instead. I think that's very, very dangerous and a very short-sighted policy.
Well, let's talk about those import deals that they want to do, because many of the trade deals which the UK government's been working on in the wake of Brexit, frankly, spell disaster for Scottish farming. I know this covering international trade at Westminster. For our listeners who can't be, who maybe not be aware of this, can you please explain the impacts that these deals will have on our farmers, as you were about to touch on there? If you can just...
Well, before Brexit happened, we had, of course, a free market in Europe and free movement of people, and that was enormously beneficial, particularly when we require labour for the likes of fruit picking and many other areas of farming, and social care and other areas as well, and hospitality. So we had free movement, but we also had free trade within Europe. But out with Europe, there were special deals that the EU had with the likes of New Zealand, which protected us against an excessive volume, for example, of New Zealand lamb. In other words, it was regulated what the imports were, and that was kept at a kind of sustainable level. But Britain, after getting out of Brexit, was desperate to show that it had some friends, and was scouring the world with the binoculars, you know, friends ahoy. And the deals that they've done tend to have been with countries that very much want to export far more of their farm produce to Scotland, and thereby undermine our markets. And because of reasons relating to climate, it is more difficult in some ways to farm, livestock farming in particular, because of weather and costs that it imposes on maintaining good husbandry and looking after animals, keeping them indoors, paying for feed. You don't really have that in New Zealand, for example. The animals are just left, the sheep are left out on the land all year round. The production costs are cheaper. So there is a real risk that our markets are being undermined. I'm pleased that my successor, Mary Goujon, is taking up this issue very strongly from what I've seen in the Scottish Parliament, as are yourself and the cohort of our MPs. But goodness me, wouldn't it be better if we were in the EU and with the EU able to enjoy the enormous benefits for farming and crofting that membership enjoyed? And it's now becoming all too manifest that these were very real benefits which we're in danger of losing, alongside the financial support, which I think is under threat from the Treasury's beady eye that want to direct this money elsewhere.
Indeed. And Emma, the worry is that Australia's lower standards combined with the tariff-free deal that Boris Johnson favours will price Scotland out of the market altogether. The New Zealand free trade deal, for example, is actually just as likely to cost the UK money rather than actually make any money. The US trade deal is frozen. The US is showing no signs of moving. But now we also have the upcoming Canada negotiations, where hormone-treated beef could also undercut Scottish farmers and undermine food standards for Scottish consumers. What are farmers in your communities thinking about this?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that, you know, Martin Kennedy, who's the president of the National Farmers Union in Scotland, has also raised concerns about these trade deals. And, you know, we've had many's a debate in Chamber and at committee when Fergus was CABSEC that I would raise in Chamber issues around like hormone treated beef, and not just using the words hormone treated beef, but actually naming the hormones and what is the purpose of ractopamine and these drugs that are used in pig production or beef production as well. And, you know, the different levels of acceptable cell counts for dairy produce it's reduced in America, for instance, compared to this country.
This is leaving, Emma, this is leaving aside all the issues of animal welfare and treatment and so forth, because there are very, very different practices in the countries that we're looking to do trade deals with. So this is on top of those issues. Yeah.
That's right. And, you know, and like it was just before, must have been just before 2021, I held a round table with the local NFU chairman, Colin Ferguson, and Joseph Stanley, who's a farmer in Leicestershire. And I was wanting their voices to be heard rather than just folk listen to me about hormone beef and better welfare that we provide in Scotland. And both Joseph Stanley and Colin did raise issues around when we're doing trade deals. Why are we should be concerned actually about whether it's Argentinian beef or the welfare of the beasts. And obviously, you know, for me in Dumfries and Galloway, we've got 48% of Scotland's dairy farms, and we need to support the dairy farms in order to produce our dairy produce. And kind of picking up on the immigration issue that Fergus was talking about during the Brexit campaign, you know, we had people saying, you're not welcome if you're from Europe, we don't want immigrants. That was Nigel Farage's hatred driven, you know, campaign slogans, and you know, like our 48% of Scotland's dairy farms, it's our Romanians, Lithuanians, Bulgarians and Polish folk who are milking the cows. Their partners are working in social care and hospitality, and their wains are in our rural schools. And so if we don't support and welcome our European neighbours, then we're really going to struggle with our rural economy, not just in Dumfries and Galway, but the other rural regions across Scotland. So I really worry about the way that like the UK government keep prolonging this anti-immigration issue, when we really do need to be welcoming people to support our rural businesses, not just in food and drink, but across the whole of Scotland, the healthcare as well.
And it doesn't, it's worthy of saying time and time again that the deficit that we've got now from the treatment that the UK has put to our friends and neighbours from who are EU nationals, the ones that have had to worry for years, and then others that are no longer feel welcome to come to the UK. Of course, there's always a welcome in Scotland, but there are barriers now to them coming here, whereas in the past it was much easier for them to come and help out. Fergus, around this time last year, you said that Scottish farmers would lose out to the tune of £170 million between then and 25, compared with the subsidies that they could have expected under the EU's Common Agricultural Policy. A year later, has the UK government done anything to change your mind?
No, they haven't satisfied me on that at all. And I think this was part of the Treasury plan to extract the UK from the European Union in order to redirect money that went to support rural Britain, including rural Scotland, to other purposes, because they never approved of paying farmers money, I think on sort of ideological grounds. I'm not sure that many of these civil servants in London spend too much time on farms, incidentally. They don't really, from their fingernails, it's not evident that they spend too much time doing any fact finding. But no, there is a very real concern that through a series of sleights of hand, that they will reduce the amount of money that we would have received had we remained in the EU. It's a complicated overall picture. But I haven't seen yet that the UK have admitted that they were at fault. And we did work with Wales and Northern Ireland on this as one at the time. So obviously my successor, Marie Goujon, will be dealing with this negotiation. And I would expect that she will, and I've seen that she's commented on this, continue to fight for the Scottish cause to make sure that we can support farmers and crofters in the way that we have in the past. You know, I'm confident that that's a task that she will be doing.
And I think as an aside, it's worth mentioning, I tackled Michael Gove in the Westminster Parliament just the other week about the Levelling Up Fund. Here in the Highlands, for example, you know, we're also losing out in tens of millions of pounds of support that we would have got through EU funding, and they've put the Highlands and Islands into the lowest of the category 3, the lowest of the categories for funding. So yeah, so there are layers upon layers of issues that are affecting rural communities, not just this. Let's turn to some of the product that we export. We saw that whiskey exports and fish exports were the worst hit in the immediate aftermath of leaving the EU in 2021. You referred to that, Emma, with exports down 32% and 52% respectively on them. Salmon exports themselves are dropped by 20%. Given the importance of these exports to the Scottish economy, how does independence revitalise these? I'll start with you, Emma.
Well, you know, I always think about the access to millions more people in a European market compared to the rest of the UK. And, you know, we've seen how successful salmon has been as a product when we are exporting it, you know, to France or Spain or wherever. So, you know, if we were independent, and then if we, the people of Scotland decide to be part of the European Union, that means that we will be able to support exporting our product directly to European markets. So, and salmon, as you've mentioned, is absolutely one of them. You know, we know that it's one of the best products that comes out of, you know, comes out of our seas.
Well, we know that whiskey, for example, will always be a great trading product, and it will go to markets outside the EU. Whiskey's taken a big hit, of course, from leaving the EU, and now we know that the only way for us to be able to rejoin that market for salmon and other goods, and we've talked about the export figures and so forth just now, is to rejoin the EU. We've had Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, rule that out as a Labour policy in the past few days. We know the Tories are not going to take us back. And Fergus, the only way for Scotland to rejoin the EU is as an independent country, isn't it?
Well, that is my view. It does very much look that way. It's difficult to understand what the Labour Party want or are planning to do. Really, it's not very clear to anybody. But we have made it clear, and we do think that membership of the EU conferred many benefits. I mean, to go into practicalities, one of them was protected geographical indicators, which, for example, protect the role of Arbroath Smokies, Orkney cheese, and these are very useful commercially to provide an enhanced value, additional value for what are recognized as products of European and world-class renown. There was a settled EU regime of PGIs which protected these Scottish famous Scottish icons in the food and drink world, and out with the EU, it's not at all clear how this is going to operate. And we in Scotland won't operate on volume. We can't compete with Brazil or New Zealand on volume. We can and must compete on quality. And farmers and crofters are innovative, ingenious. They're thinking of new ways of doing things all the time. Many of the younger generation are business people first in espousing new business techniques, particularly digital technology, to get the maximum yield in arable, for example. And there's moves to look at gene editing, not genetic modification, but gene editing. There's a debate now about this, and it appears in the face of it that there's perhaps much to be gained. The First Minister suggested there should be a debate about this fairly recently. And I think in the farming world, there's a recognition that the better the quality, the more secure our products will be in this world, and exporting will always be really important. And these are just not matters, Drew, which the UK government were that concerned about. Yeah, they were always polite. They always played a good game of cricket. They were always affable if you were civil, and that was fine. But we're not playing cricket. We're in a fiercely competitive world here, and you need to really fight for your own corner. And that fight, that appetite to go the extra mile for Scotland's interests was completely lacking. And I can say that hand on heart because, I spent hundreds of hours at meetings with UK ministers, and no matter how pleasant and polite they were, there wasn't that impetus of fighting for Scotland's interests and corner and putting that extra bit of effort in with themselves or their officials to secure that result. And why would it be otherwise? Because they don't represent Scotland. They almost all represent English constituencies. There aren't actually very many Scottish MPs in the Tory party. It's a bit like in America, there used to be great herds of buffalo. Those days have gone, but there will always be one or two of them dotted around the place, I suppose.
And these trade deals, all these trade deals that the UK government are now desperately searching for, if you package them all together, they make pennies in the pounds that we've lost from the EU. Rejoining the EU would reopen these lost trade links and would allow exports to flourish again, while allowing us the freedom to create bespoke trade deals with non-EU nations, of course, as an independent country. Emma, what would you hope to see happen in the immediate period following a yes vote with regards to farming to support the industry in the move to rejoining the EU?
Okay, so just before I answer that, I would just remind you of Liz Truss hailing a deal with Japan, selling them cheddar cheese, which Japanese folk didn't eat. So that was something that, they're good at the spin, but really what's not happening is good at getting the best deal for our Scottish farmers. But, you know, in a future independent Scotland, I suppose the immediate thing would be reassuring our farmers that the Scotland and independent Scotland has the farmers' backs. Basically, we want to support the production to be the best, to have the best welfare support, to make sure we've got engaging in local supply chains, which we've seen during COVID that people have supported short local supply chains. People are more engaged now in where their farm produced products come from. So, you know, and again, we have less favoured areas in Scotland that are 75% of the land compared to the opposite in England. And you know, we grow grass really, really well in Scotland. So we do well for our beef and our sheep and our belted galloways, for instance, out on the hill all year round. So I would want to focus on how can we maybe support processing in Scotland, like instead of sending all our milk south of the border, can we process it in Scotland then and work on developing maybe small little cooperative factories that support short supply chains and local economies. That's one thing I would do, so that we basically help support employment and businesses directly on our own doorsteps.
Well, you mentioned, you know, selling things across the border. Of course, it's often said that, you know, Scotland is exports mainly to the rest of the UK, but that's true of, you know, for example, pipe goods, oil, gas, renewable electricity, and services like insurance and so forth. But very few people appreciate that actually the vast majority of our manufactured goods, the things we make here in Scotland, go out to the EU and the wider world with it. Fergus, how is Scottish produce thought of around the world? Is it something that would do well for us if we're able to rejoin the EU, or even in the interim? Is it something that would still do well as an export for us?
Oh yes, I think the Scottish brand is very strong, and I saw that when, for example, about 6 months before lockdown, I went to the Anuga, which is the world's largest a food and drink sort of trade fair where businesses go along to win new export markets. So I went along to fly the flag at the Scottish stand, and I saw for myself how well regarded Scotland is in many, many niche areas. Salmon, for example, which has the complement of La Belle Rouge in France, which is not handed out lightly to non-French producers of food, I can tell you. Scottish steaks, hugely prized in Canada, in Italy, where I met buyers who were dealing with Scottish suppliers. So the food and drink industry has been a big success story, and until Brexit came along, which really caused and is causing continued difficulties. But we can overcome these, you know, and farming is a long-term business. Farmers don't see things in terms of months, but in several years. And there will always be that niche market there for quality produce from Scotland. And we do have a very wide range of products. Of course, each sector will have its challenges. That's the way life is. But in Scotland, I think that these challenges have by and large been overcome in producing quality goods, which the world enjoys. And that's just one of the many strengths we have in our economy, which is far stronger, I think, than people realise in Scotland, maybe because people who support the union have been too busy trying to sort of indoctrinate us into this strange view that somehow we're too poor to run our own affairs, unlike any other country that exists in the world.
Well, let's talk about. Sorry, Emma, you want to
just a quick thought. I read a recent study which kind of backs up what Fergus is saying about Scottish produce being recognised across Europe and the world. The recent study demonstrated that 65% of Scots preferred to see a saltire on products in supermarkets compared to only 10% said they would want to see a union flag. So that just shows the power of the brand that people recognise as a good welfare and a good produced product in Scotland. So if we can show folk that this is what they're getting across the whole of Europe and the world, if they see a saltire on the label, then that's obviously a good sign for us.
And as an independent nation, what positive changes can we make to support the livelihoods of Scottish farmers into the future? Fergus.
Well, I think that we can make sure that we continue to provide support for farmers and crofters to produce food as well as being the custodians of the landscape. I think that many farmers feel, what are farmers worried about at the moment? They're worried that the government doesn't support food production in the UK, that the money is going to be withdrawn, and it is gradually being withdrawn. Secondly, they're worried about not the vegan movement, because of course people are quite entitled to choose if they wish to be vegans or vegetarians or choose to enjoy our high quality meat in Scotland. It's entirely a matter of individual choice, but there is a concern that some campaigners want to ban meat products and dairy products indeed, which of course are so essential for a balanced diet and the health of many of us, and particularly teenagers growing up, for healthy bones and so on. So they're worried about that, and they're worried about the extremists at the end of the environmental issue that want to ban things which are sort of good practices in farming, like controlling predators, crows and foxes and so on, which otherwise will take land. So I think these are some of the things farmers are worried about, and I hope that in Scotland we would be able better to be their friend and be their advocate, as well as on the macro level of providing that voice, that direct, powerful voice that is required to secure their interests on the international stage. But farmers and crofters, you know, they're very resilient, very hardworking people. They don't think that anyone owes them a living, and they're very resilient in making their own success and working hard to do that. And we're very fortunate in the country to have farmers and crofters as the bedrock of rural Scotland.
And I think that support you're talking about has been demonstrated by you in particular, and Emma and others over the past number of years in the Scottish Parliament, where you have had to fight these battles, as we mentioned earlier, to get the payments, to get the support. And now we've got the battles that are going on to maintain the standards. Let's switch to something a bit wider, still talking about being outward looking and so forth. But given the growth of soft power, Emma, that the Scottish Government has been engaging in, and the declining place of the UK within the world, where do you see an independent Scotland sitting in the world stage?
Well, we saw evidence of the First Minister's ability to engage at COP26 in Glasgow, and that was, demonstrated by the goodwill towards Scotland there. And so you don't need to be a massive country to exert influence. What you need to do is obviously, look after your citizens and look outward and engage. And that's something that I would continue to want to do as far as engaging with our European neighbours and wider neighbours as well. And so that's a simple example of how Scotland did show that we can host this COP26 and use that as a platform to show how mature Scotland is when approaching dealing with climate emergency, for instance. And like for us supporting farmers locally, let's encourage young people to get into farming. Let's support skills development, whether it's agri-forestry, whether it's rural as in farming, whether it's beef, sheep production and arable. So as a small country, or Stuart Stevenson used to say to me, we're not a small country, Emma, we're a right-sized country. And so what we need to say is we are a right-sized country in it, so that the government can engage without too many steps with the citizens, so that we can all work together to look at making sure that Scotland's voice is heard on the world stage. And back to COP26, that's what the First Minister was able to demonstrate last November.
And what are your thoughts on that, Fergus?
Well, I think Emma's made many good points, particularly that Scotland's not a small country. I mean, I think we've got a good mix of population versus land size in Scotland. And looking at it for the rest of the century, Drew, I mean, plainly, climate change is an issue that is concerning people in the world, throughout the world. And we can make a contribution far more than the rest of the UK because we've got the land assets in forestry, in peatland management, in renewable energy. And the potential in renewable energy is completely unrealized because Ofgem and the UK government are so lethargic, almost to the point of stasis, actually, in not using our assets in the West Isles, the best wind assets in Europe, in not using our pump storage assets. And we've got projects just ready to go, already consented, gone through the process, ready to go, meeting the needs of balancing a grid based on renewable energy with storage. That's what we require, more storage. Why on earth are they not using what's on their own doorstep when they're importing nuclear power from France? Why? Well, it's because we've got a London government. It's quite incredible. So I would say that we're not a small country. We are a right-sized country, as Stuart Stevenson put us right, as he so often did, on a very wide range of topics, as I recall. And we do have a mix of populated areas and very sparsely populated areas, which allow us to use our land for the 21st century, I think. So we're uniquely well placed, and with assets like salmon farming, and which I think should and will do far better in years to come, with some reforms that are underway or about to be underway, I expect. And whisky, of course, is the goose that continues to lay golden eggs for the UK Treasury.
Indeed. And it's interesting. Nobody's saying that we won't face challenges or we won't have our own difficulties here, but being able to make the decisions means that you can go out there and you can engage in a much more positive way. Emma was talking about the treatment of EU nationals and people who come to work here earlier. That's something that you can rectify as an independent country, whereas at the moment we're just stuck with a policy that nobody agrees with here. So there's a big place for our soft power, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, there is. And if you look at countries over the last 100 years that have regained or gained their independence, such as Ireland, such as the Baltic countries, such as Scandinavian countries, it's just around about a century that they've enjoyed independence, perhaps slightly longer. None of them are wanting to go back and subjugate themselves into a larger union with others. All of them, or almost all of them, have decided that they can be independent within the European Union and get the benefits from that, whilst remaining a proud independent countries that offer the world great things. Some of the most successful countries in the world, particularly in terms of measuring success by social cohesion, healthiness, good lives, and so on, and as well as a strong GDP. So, Scandinavian countries, Baltic countries, Ireland, they are poster boys for independence, really. And why not Scotland? So you're right, Drew. That doesn't mean we won't make mistakes, because, we're all fallible. But I think that overall, and after a fairly short period, there will be no going back, and that people in Scotland will see this as essential for our continuing success. And it does rest with us now, really, to drive that task on. We are the ones in the driving seat at the moment to get the referendum, to deliver a successful result in that referendum, and drive Scotland forward. So I'm very much looking forward to that work now that we're just about over COVID. We hope we can get back to the main purpose for which we, all three of us and others, have been elected to serve.
Indeed. Well, let's finish with this question about what you would like to see in an independent Scotland. Emma, if I could ask you, if you could implement one policy or change a current policy that we currently can't change or introduce in an independent Scotland, what would it be?
Basically, the ability to have full fiscal control of everything that we produce. We are a rich country in resources, and we don't have the ability to say what we want to do with when we're sending our electricity to the grid, or wind generation and all of that revenue. So basically, what we can't do now is decide where we spend our money. And in an independent Scotland, we can choose absolutely what we will do. If we have a strong economy, we decide how we want to spend the revenue that we create from it.
And Fergus?
Well, I think the biggest mistake in life is to spurn an opportunity when it arises, because the window of opportunity can often slam shut in your fingers if you don't take the opportunity when it arises. And similarly, I think that independence would allow us to grab the opportunities where that window has been slammed on our fingers by London for far too long, whether it's in renewable energy, whether it's on the emerging opportunities of carbon capture and storage, which I think could extend the life and livelihoods of people in the Northeast by several decades if we grab that opportunity now, whether it's in maximising success of our farming, our forestry, our fishing, and our whisky and salmon sectors, which already have that cachet of world renown, building on our finance sector, investment sector, which is respected and trusted throughout the world. Grabbing opportunities is what it's all about. And it's very difficult to grab opportunities when the people who make the decisions are based in London.
Emma Harper, MSP, Fergus Ewing, MSP, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Scotland's Choice.
Thank you, Drew. Thanks.
Thanks, Drew.